Men are good, as are you. Indeed, men are good, as are you. And indeed, so is Janice Fiamengo, who is with me today, one of the most astute observers of masculinity today, in my humble opinion. And Janice and I were just talking about my own experience with the media before, back in the 90s. I had a very warm welcome from the media about men and grief until they found out that I basically loved men, that I really cared about men. I mean, it was CBS Evening News, the Washington Post, the New York Times, La CNN, NBF, the NFL channel, all of them, until they found out that, Golden really does care about men. He's not going to blame them. Because today, and what happened then, all of my media stuff dried up and no one found me after that. But today we're going to talk about a group that has found the opposite to be true. When you blame men, you get a lot of publicity. If all you have to do is blame men a little bit and say women need the help, and you're going to be in good shape. Right, Janice?
Yeah, it's amazing. It
It
really is
is amazing.
amazing.
And we're going to talk
Yeah.
about a call to men. Tony Porter's A Call to Men and a thing they call the man box. Janice, where do we start? Because there's so many things we could do with this.
Yeah. Well, A Call to Men, as you just said, is an organization, a very large and clearly very well-funded, slick organization
Yep.
that exists to promote the transformation of manhood, as it says, through the pushing of feminist propaganda about how everything in a man's life must be directed towards the valuing and the protecting and the providing for women and girls. And everything in a man's life must be focused on taking responsibility for all the things that are wrong in his society and for blaming himself for that and trying to transform himself into a feminist paragon. And it's startling to see the nakedness of the propaganda that's
Yes.
being pushed by this organization and that
Yes.
has huge corporate support.
Yes.
So yeah, let's take a look at the I guess at the first page of their website.
That's the about page, I think. But
Yeah,
it says pretty much
that's the
what they're
about
looking at.
page.
Should we
About
read
A
that
Call to
first
Men.
paragraph?
Sure. We work to transform society by promoting healthy, respectful manhood. Of course, we'll get to that in a minute. What is that in their definition? It's clearly not traditional manhood. And offering trainings and educational resources for companies, government agencies, schools, and community groups. And when you read further into this organization, you discover that they go everywhere. They are spreading this message of man blaming and of the prioritizing and valuing only of women, girls, and other marginalized persons. They're in the
Hmm.
schools, they're in the military, they're in sports organizations, they're in community organizations, they're in big companies, they're in offices. They are just everywhere. And look at the page of their corporate support. And they
U.S.
have a
Army.
huge organization. I mean, I don't know what kind of money is coming in from all of these major
Hmm.
places,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
they're able to employ a large number of what they call trainers. They have a large board of directors. The core group of people who, I guess, do all of these various workshops is also very large. There are a
Yep.
lot of people making good salaries telling men that they are always the problem and that they have to change in feminist approved ways.
Yes. Yes. Should we look at the man box first? All
Yeah.
right, let's look at the man box first. Let's see if we can bring that up. Let's change over to here a little bit. There we go. The
Yeah,
man box.
one of the things they claim that is particularly useful about their organization is their coining of this idea of the man box. This is essentially the center of their theorizing about masculinity, what's wrong with it, and how it can be transformed. And as we would expect, if any of us have done any reading into feminist theory, It is a vision of masculinity as entirely damaging both to men and to society in general, especially to women. And it's a theory of masculinity that claims that everything about masculinity, they don't say masculinity so much, they tend to say manhood, but everything about masculinity is socially determined. Therefore, it can be changed. It's something that's created through social conditioning, and it can be completely transformed. There's nothing innate, there's nothing natural, there's nothing related to men's biology about how men behave or how
Right.
men are in the
Right.
world.
Right.
So yeah, so here it is. The man box, as they say, represents how boys and male identified people, we have to have the politically correct lingo, of course, are taught to view manhood, women, and girls. And
Yeah.
everything about it is feminist. Women and girls are objects, the property of men, and have less value than men. Then everything else is about boys and men,
Okay.
having to be masculine, etc.
But time out. That one little piece, the women are
Yes,
property. Women are, what do they say? The
they're
property of them,
objects.
they're
Yeah,
objects, and they're of less value than men. Where did they get that idea?
they got it from feminist theory.
Yeah,
They
that's
got it
the.
from Marxism.
Yes.
Um, Frederick Engels, in his book "The
Huh.
Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State," talks about women as property of men. Feminist theorists themselves, going back even before Marx and Engels wrote, we're already talking about women as property of men. It relates to some of the aspects of the traditional law of marriage, but certainly women were they were never objects. They were never property, certainly not. But this was the idea that was created in the 19th century or even earlier about women and their victimization at the hands of men. And yeah, just
Yes, and
it's just nonsense. It's a
if we
made up
could
idea.
interrupt for a short commercial, Janice is doing a series on the File 2.0, and it's all about feminism in its early stages in the 18th or 19th century, Janice.
Yeah,
And
I'm mainly focusing on the
oh my
19th century. I'll
gosh,
have some dips back into the
it
18th
is
century.
amazing. It's just amazing. You can find it at Studio B on YouTube, or menargood.com also links to those. So have a look at them. They're fantastic. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Janice. Where were we?
Yeah, this idea that women are objects. This
It's
has been
just
asserted. It's a big lie, is what it is. It's a
no
lie
man
that is
I know
asserted
thinks
so
like that.
much.
No man
Yeah,
I know thinks like that. I mean, it's just
no.
completely foreign. How
What
do they
does
get
this
away with
mean?
this?
I know. How can it's because it's just a lie that is repeated so often that everyone comes to believe it, and it assumes an unquestioned status. Yeah, what does that mean, that women are objects that men are willing to die for, that men are willing to change their lives for, that men are willing to work themselves into an early grave, that men are willing to make decisions about their lives in order to please the women in their lives, their wives in particular, their partners, their daughters, that these become the primary objects of men's affection and concern. I mean, it is such a lie. It is so much opposed to what we know about real men's lives. It's shocking to see it in a website.
It
It's not
is.
shocking, really. I mean, it's not surprising, but it's disgusting. In a website that claims this is an organization that wants to help men and make their lives better,
Yes.
slanders men in this way, and then everything else in that list. It's mostly about it's full of truisms about stereotypes of masculinity, that boys and men aren't supposed to cry, that boys and men aren't supposed to openly express emotions. We've heard all of this so
Yes.
many times
Yes.
before.
Yes.
Um, I mean, there's so much to say about that too.
Yes. There is a lot to say
The
about that. And it's basically anti science because the research has proven over and over again that everything they're saying here is bullshit. I mean, it's like if you look at the precarious manhood research, they say, we expect men to be more aggressive. We expect men to want to strive for status. We expect men to do this and to do that. And all the things they list are all the things the feminists list for toxic masculinity. The same thing the
Mhm,
man box is talking about here. So if they'd
absolutely.
just study their research a little bit, they'd find out, oops, maybe we're not quite right about this stuff. So this is
And how
anti-science.
Yeah. How would you explain that the precarious masculinity research shows that this stuff is anti-science? Explain that for anybody who
Well,
doesn't quite understand
one
it.
of the things they say is that precarious manhood research says, that we expect men to not want to appear like women. Straight up, we expect them to not want to appear like women. And what they're saying here in the man box is the thing that's bad about men is they're afraid of their feminine side, you know?
Hmm.
No, that's completely erroneous. That's completely erroneous. Men naturally, because of their biology, because of their socialization, they're going to want to not appear womanly unless that is something that is bringing them status. If now in today's world, if it's higher status is to be gotten from looking more feminine, men are going to do that because men basically are going to do things to increase their status. That's another thing
Hmm.
precarious man will tell you about is that's the way men work is they work on a status, and the status is all about being attractive to women.
Hmm. Well, and that's the interesting thing, I think, is that in some ways the precarious manhood research and what these people, these feminist researchers and feminist advocates are claiming, in some ways it intersects. They are looking at similar types of patterns and social expectations. But if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is that in the precarious manhood research, it's recognized that this has a natural biological basis. It relates to centuries of evolutionary development. It relates to how men are in their bodies. It relates to
Yes.
testosterone. It relates to, all the things that I know you know much more about than I know about. Whereas the man box people are claiming that this is simply an aspect of socialization that can
Yes.
be got rid of in a blink. We can simply
Yes.
declare that from now on, men are to be more like women, and they will be, and all
And
will be
the
fine.
world will be
And,
better.
the world will be transformed into a utopia where all violence and all oppression
God.
cease. And, and that's the thing that is so worrisome about these activists.
Yes.
The other thing, of course, here is that they never recognize any of the positive aspects of this
Right.
socialization,
Right.
that
Right.
actually controlling one's emotions and being stoic, showing courage in difficult situations, these are incredibly positive contributors to
Yes.
civilization.
Yeah. And
Women
helpful.
need to be encouraged to be more like this, both in
No.
one's both in one's private life and in society in general. It is
Yes.
good to control one's emotions. Of course, they conflate controlling emotion with repressing emotion, and they
Right.
are not the same thing
Exactly.
at all.
Exactly. They are not the same thing. And men deal with their emotions in quiet, introverted, subtle ways. You know,
Hmm.
they're not going to go out wah, 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 because they know that what happens when they do that is people judge them harshly.
Yes, yes.
And so
People turn away in disgust from men who do
exactly.
that.
And then the men realize I got to do this on my own. And
Yeah.
then he's judged for not dealing with his feelings.
Hmm. I know. I mean, yeah,
The whole thing of this man box is blaming the victim. I mean,
it
it boils
is.
down to
Yeah.
blaming the victim over and
Yeah.
over and over again, and they do not even have a clue about how they're doing that.
No.
Not
And the
even a
other thing
clue.
about it that I find so dishonest is that it begins by saying that the man box represents how boys and male identified people are taught to
Hmm.
view. Okay, so that's a passive voice construction. It doesn't tell us who is doing the teaching. The
Yes.
implication is that it's this amorphous male dominated society that's doing that. So it's always, as
Right.
you say, blaming masculinity for masculinity itself. But what we have to ask, and what we've been talking about for years regarding men, is who is doing the teaching?
Yes.
Who expects men to behave this way? Is it only male dominated society? No, it's women. It's women. It is mothers who teach their boys how to be. It is women in general who respond to men who are strong and successful. in positive ways and
Yes.
respond negatively to men who are not strong and successful and stoic, etc. So the fact that they won't even honestly evaluate the involvement of women and the contribution of women to these social expectations shows that the
Yes.
project is a lie from the beginning, and it's bound to fail if they don't acknowledge women's agency.
Correct.
Then the
They're
whole
sunk.
project is, yeah, it's
Yeah.
just useless.
Yeah. And they also don't acknowledge the positive that men have. The research in the last 10, 15 years has been very clear. That is that when fathers are in the home, there's less violence. You know, I think they
Yeah,
said as 1% less in fatherlessness, or in other words, the more fatherlessness you have by 1%, 3% increase in violence in adolescence. So for every 1% you go down in fatherlessness, you go up 3% in violence. And the man box is not teaching that. I mean, fathers,
no, no,
they should
not
be
at all.
preaching, get those fathers in the home now.
Yeah, well,
This is the
they don't make a
oh
comment
my
about that
gosh.
anywhere,
Oh
and
my gosh.
and that's part of what we were just saying about self control and control of
Yeah,
one's
yeah,
emotions,
yeah. That's the masculine.
because how do you reduce violence? Well, one of the ways is through practicing self control. Fathers teach that to their children.
Yes,
They teach appropriate boundaries.
yes,
They teach recognizing what feelings should not be acted upon.
yep. And
And
they teach not to poke someone in the eye. They teach the difference between violence and fun. And that's
exactly.
what roughhousing is all about. You know, we're
Mhm.
not going to do it anymore for today because you did such and such. Oh, Dad. Nope, no more today. You know, he's setting a limit. He's saying, no, we're not doing that because this is wrong. You don't poke someone in the
Mm.
eye. You don't pull
Yes.
hair. You don't stick your finger in the ear. I mean, whatever. And the dads, just by their presence, teach this to the children. And this is critical. The prisons are what, 85% fatherless
To
men.
even higher. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's
And you know,
unbelievable.
and these theorists and advocates, they continually conflate things that are quite different. For instance, in the very last item there, they talk about aggression equals dominance, whatever that means. Um, you know, there are positive forms of aggression,
Yes, yes,
and there are positive forms of dominance. If you are dominant in a hierarchy because you are particularly good at something, you're particularly skilled, you're particularly
right,
courageous,
right,
you have a great sense of humor and can tell wonderful jokes that everybody wants to hear, whatever it happens to be, that has to do with dominance. There are no societies where there are not hierarchies of dominance.
right,
So the
right,
question is, do we want a society that's based around hierarchies of dominance that are based on merit and being good at doing things and bringing things of value to the society? Or do we want a society that has a hierarchy of victimhood and
right,
claims to moral
right.
superiority based on that? You know, that it's, and this idea that all aggression is bad, that all competitiveness is bad, that's simply not true, and it denies centuries of experience in civilizational
Yes,
progress.
it's one-sided to an
Yeah,
extreme.
it's,
One-sided to an extreme.
yeah, and yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, let's keep on going, because there are other
Let's
things
go
that
to
they
let's
talk
just get
about
a
too that
taste.
are,
Let's get a taste of what Mr. Porter's like. Here's Mr. Porter. If women could end violence against women and girls by themselves, they would have done it already. What?
yeah, and this is the thing that's so striking about this organization's
Oh
website. It's
God.
filled with these little gems, often pulled out in boxes like this, that we are, I guess, supposed to read and take very seriously as special
Right.
insights or bits
Right.
of feminist wisdom.
Yes.
And it, you know, it's sort of, well, you were saying this before we started, Tom. You kind of read it and go, well, yeah, I guess. I mean, what does that even mean? I don't even know what the implication is, aside from that, you know, men have to step up to
That doesn't
end
make any
violence.
sense. It's like
But
it's
it
like
doesn't.
the flower saying, "If I could have if I could have ended this by now, I would have made the cake all by myself. You know,
Hmm.
no, you
Yeah,
can't
it
end violence by just having women do it or just men do it. You got to work together. This is a something that requires people working together, not blaming one group and saying they're the problem. That's crazy. It's just
and
crazy.
it points to the other contradiction, of course, in this entire project, which is that their primary objective, they claim, is to make men different, to make them essentially softer. That's what they're saying. We
Right,
want men
right.
to be softer,
Oh yeah,
less competitive, less aggressive, more in touch with their emotions, more
right.
inclined to cry, more
Yeah,
inclined to ask for help, etc.,
yeah,
etc. Okay,
yeah.
but then they're
More
also
like
saying
women.
to these more like women, but then they're saying, hey, women can't end violence all by themselves. So if men are more like women, how are men going to end violence? Because there are always going to
But
be
Janice,
some violent people. So how do
just
you end? So men are not to be violent, but men are to stop violent men. How do you do that if you don't have men that are strong, courageous, capable of controlling their emotions, and capable of, when necessary, actually stepping in and stopping violence? That's never explained.
it sounds like a winner to me, but I don't think
Mm.
that Tony Porter's going to like it so much.
No. And who's going to stop the violent women? Of course, they're never mentioned either.
Ooh,
What about the mothers who abused their sons?
ooh,
What about the mothers who use psychological terrorism against the members of their family? Who's to
yes,
stop them? How are those women to get help so that they can change their behaviors? None of that
correct.
is acknowledged, of course. What about the men who are trapped in relationships where they're
Yes,
being physically and or psychologically abused? None of
yep,
that is ever mentioned. Well, it's
yep,
very lightly mentioned once, I think. But if we absolve women from all agency, and we say that women are responsible only for good things and men responsible mainly for bad, then we're never going to be able to really get at the roots of violence, which they
right.
claim is what they're interested in.
Exactly, exactly right. We'll never get there because they're only seeing two extremes. The women are victims and the men are the perpetrators. As long as
Yeah.
you see it like that, it's never going to go anyplace. It's never going to get
And
better.
that's not based on any credible research either. Don
Zero.
Dutton, for example, a
Yeah,
researcher out of the University of
yeah,
British Columbia, who's
yeah.
worked on this extensively for about 40 years, I think, made the point at one of our ICMIs that that paradigm of the violent man and the non-violent woman being abused by the man in some kind of domestic situation, that accounts for about 9% of
Nine.
all
Wow.
domestic abuse.
Huh.
The others
Interesting.
are cases of the men and women getting it on together,
Yes,
hitting one
yes.
another,
A
abusing one
brawl.
another,
Right, right. And the
and
woman,
also cases of women themselves
right,
initiating violence
right.
and perpetrating most of it.
Yes,
This
yes.
organization absolutely can't deal with those kinds of unpleasant realities.
That's interesting. I had heard like 20%, but he says 9%.
I
That's
think. I mean, I could be wrong. Now, I'm
I may be
basing this
wrong
on
too.
memory, and
I'll
my
take
my
your
memory
figure.
is
I
faulty.
like 9%.
Probably. I mean, he's done
He
meta
knows.
studies of
He
this,
knows.
and so I could be
Yes.
wrong about the exact number, but it is definitely a very small figure.
Yeah, yeah, 9 or 20. I mean, both of them are tiny. And
Yeah.
the majority of violence is not men beating women. You know,
No.
indeed not. Should we go to their little healthy
Yeah.
page,
Let's
what
keep
healthy
going.
masculinity
Yeah.
is?
Healthy masculinity.
Healthy manhood. I love this first paragraph. Healthy, respectful manhood means valuing and respecting women, girls, and LGBTQ, trans, and non binary people, and respecting and valuing oneself by striving to live authentically. Okay.
Yeah. There's so much there. I mean, for one thing, that last phrase, striving to live authentically.
Oh,
What does that
God.
mean? They're not counseling authentic living. Authentic living is living that is true to oneself. They're telling men that they have to conform to a feminist approved model
Yes,
of their
yes.
of their masculine selfhood. That's the opposite of authentic.
And the first thing out of the box is you have to be respectful towards women and
Yeah.
value
Why?
women and respect
Hmm.
women and girls. It's like, what's the connection between that and healthy manhood?
Yeah.
I mean, there's seems to me there's a lot about manhood that's not about just respecting women. I mean, it's respecting women and
Mhm.
girls. That's a good thing, but it's a slice of what manhood should be, right? Not the whole
Well, I
thing. And
mean,
they're playing it out to be the whole thing. It's like, what the
yeah, I
hell?
mean, well, yes, that is the overall impetus of this agenda is
Right,
that
right.
the man's entire identity has to be based on putting women and girls at the center of his life and making everything that he does and is be
Yes,
about that,
and
which
the
sounds like traditional chivalry
yes,
to me. I don't see what the difference is,
with the
but
implication that since he hasn't done that before, that the world is so
yes.
much worse a place. You
Yes,
know,
exactly. They've never done it up until now. And now at
right?
last,
Yeah, we can.
finally, men are going to respect and value women. Um, and that notion of respecting women, what does that even mean? Of course, we give a basic respect to all human beings. And the fact that they don't emphasize that is a tell for me. What about respecting other men?
Well,
Are
I
they
was
to
thinking
do
the same
that?
thing, but I
You
think
know,
the respecting women means don't disagree with them.
yes. Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
respect,
it means don't hold women to the same standards that
right?
you hold men to.
Yes,
It
yes,
means whatever a woman says must be acknowledged as true or valued in some way. It means applauding women for whatever they set out to do and
yeah,
claiming that they're perfectly capable of doing it, welcoming them into various workplaces that they haven't flourished in before. It really just means applauding and supporting feminist
women,
goals and feminist
right,
ideology.
right.
And why a man should have to do that? I mean, respect, as the old saying goes, respect is to be earned, not granted.
Yes,
And
yes,
so I'm sure, and my experience of men is that they're quite willing and able to respect anyone who shows that they're worthy of respect. But this automatic assumption that it must be given, and it must be given on the basis of sex,
right.
is again
Crazy.
a non-starter
It's crazy.
for an equal and flourishing
Yeah,
society.
it's insane.
Yeah.
Nutty, nutty, nutty. Should we go to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
All right, let's see what we got here. Preventing violence against all women and girls.
Yeah. Well, there we are. I mean, again, this is
There
a
we are.
series of assertions that are not backed up by empirical evidence and don't make sense just in terms of kind of common sense. It says man box culture has allowed the ongoing epidemic of violence against women and girls to persist throughout human history. I mean, whatever that means. I think that all evidence, FBI evidence, the evidence of sociologists, is that violence has dramatically declined
Yes.
in the Western world, certainly throughout the 20th century,
Yeah.
and specifically violence against women and girls
Yep.
is very, very low. To call it an epidemic is simply an overstatement on any measure. Then it goes on. Research by the World Health Organization shows that men and boys who adhere to rigid traditional notions of masculinity are more likely to report having used violence against a partner. Again, I don't know what that means. They define traditional masculinity in their own particular way. I went to the link there from the World Health Organization. It's a huge document. I don't know where it says what they claim it says, and I don't know how that could possibly be proven or be
Typical
seen to have
feminist
any
trick.
kind of scientific
Yeah.
veracity.
Yeah.
What do you mean by traditional? It's a tradition in Western culture to show deference for those who are physically weaker. There's a long, centuries long tradition of chivalry. There's a centuries long tradition of men never using violence against women. One of the pieces of research that I've done is into the work of Ernest Belford Bax,
Mhm.
who was a lawyer in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, and wrote about the fact that women were far more leniently treated under the law for all sorts of different types of crimes, ranging from the relatively trivial, libel, common assault, right up to the far more serious of serious abuse and even murder. If a man used any violence against his wife, she could divorce him. He would be flogged. He would have to support this woman for the rest of his life. If she used violence against him, nothing happened.
Right.
That deeply ingrained belief that men must never be violent, even against a violent woman, it's been there in our culture for centuries. So to claim, that traditional masculinity somehow affirmed violence against women is simply not true. And
BS.
then it finally ends. Historically, women have been at the forefront of addressing gender-based violence. We must continue to center the voices of women, but men have to be involved. So in other words, so have the women failed then? Is that what he's saying? They've been at the forefront, but their advocacy has done nothing, because we're still in an epidemic of violence against women. So which is it? Are women powerful and incredibly influential and should continue to be centered, or are women completely powerless and unable to do anything, in which case why are we centering them? It just
Because
it,
we need the narrative. I mean,
yeah,
that's the whole basis of this thing is they need this narrative of men bad, men violent, and women victims. They need that whole thing, and they're going to keep
yeah,
pumping it until they die. I mean, it's
yeah.
just
Hmm.
that's at the bottom of all of this stuff is this whole narrative, the feminist narrative. In
Yeah.
fact, the whole man box thing did not start with Tony Porter. It started with a group in Oakland, the Oakland Men's Project, I think in 1978 or 79, and it started with the feminist movement and a domestic violence conference that was national that started there. And so their origins are all feminist. The
Of
origins
course.
of this idea, and Tony Porter borrowed the idea of the man box from these people who started it by saying something like, a man, what's a man like in a box? What's it like to be in a man box, or something like that? And to their credit, they also said, what's it like to be a lady in a box? And so, they almost looked at both sides. They didn't quite, but they almost looked at both sides. But Porter's only looking at one side, and that's it. Boys and
Hmm.
girls. That's all there is to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ay, ay,
Women
ay.
and girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, essentially, well, I mean, we've already said this, but they're essentially telling men that the best they can hope for, since there will never be any acknowledgement of women's agency in perpetrating violence, in making men act in ways that are detrimental to men. There will never
Right.
be any acknowledgement of that, and there will always be a stress on men's responsibility, on blaming men for everything. So the best men can hope for within this particular man box that they're creating is for men to devote their lives to trying to please and affirm women within a feminist compliant theoretical framework. That's the
Yes.
best they can hope for. And maybe they won't be blamed quite as much if they're willing to do that. And the idea that that can lead to wholeness and health and community flourishing is so obviously wrong. And yet, here we see the incredible level of corporate sponsorship and respect that these kinds of asinine pronouncements are being given.
Exactly. I shudder to think how many millions of dollars are going into this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of
Yeah.
money. Should we do the
Hmm.
the next one?
Yeah.
Let's see what we got here.
Yeah. This is
Improving
pretty well the
physical.
last.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the last
Hmm.
roundup. Oh boy, man, box is killing us. The American Psychological Association released first ever guidelines showing that traditional masculinity is harmful and that socializing boys to suppress their emotions causes damage that echoes both inwardly and outwardly. The statistics tell the story. Whew, how about that?
Yeah. So
Oh, the
this is the
APA and their wisdom.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
God.
yeah. They must have been delighted when the APA came out with their statements. And even though, of course, they've been harshly criticized, and many, serious psychologists and sociologists have pointed out all that is missing, all that is overlooked, all that's misrepresented in those APA guidelines. Of course,
Yes.
they seize on them as
Oh boy.
their evidence. Nothing about it. It wouldn't be that men are doing badly today because the laws are biased against them. It wouldn't be that men have been separated from their children and in many, many cases of divorce, unable to see them. It wouldn't be because hatred of men is allowed to be openly expressed, and that men, as they're represented in popular media, are either bunglers and fools
Or
or predators,
right, right,
terrible people. None
right,
of that makes its way into their analysis of
right.
why some men aren't doing well in our society.
Yes.
Um, you
They're
know, it,
completely blind to any emotional or physical pain men have. And
mhm.
it's just not in their playbook. And it's for that reason that the whole thing is built on this blame the victim idea.
Yeah.
They cannot see men's pain, and so they blame men. You
Hmm.
blame someone for what's happening to them. That's blaming the victim just up and down the pike.
Yeah. I'd really love to
Ugh.
know what they would do if they were doing a training session somewhere. And a man said, I've never heard this stuff before. I've known that all my life. I have felt the opposite of what you're claiming. In some ways, I feel I have never felt that I was more valued, more valuable than women. I've always felt I was less valuable than women. I feel like I was taught that from kindergarten on. I had a mother who told me that I was no good. I've had girlfriends who told me I was no good. I've applied for jobs and been told that they were looking for a woman. I've, you know, watched commercials and television shows in which it's
This is,
clearly evident that the women are superior to the men. So
buddy,
I don't fit into your paradigm. Where do
buddy,
I fit in the
buddy.
man box? What would they say to him?
This is the very thing, buddy, that keeps you in that man box. You can't see women's pain. You're blind to it. You think everything's okay. Everything's not okay. There's lots of problems. You can't see it. That's the kind of thing they would tell that guy. I'll bet you
I
$100.
guess.
You
Yeah,
know?
I guess.
Oh.
Yeah.
And the
I
guy would
will.
go, he'd start wondering, what? What? Have I never seen this before? And it puts him in a crazy making place. It's like, what are they talking about? But that's
Yeah.
the kind of crap I'm sure these people pull.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
nefarious. It's
It
really
really
evil.
is.
It's evil.
And
It's
so
immoral.
a man who is depressed, who has been abused, perhaps by women in his
Right.
life,
Right.
he a man who has had suicidal thoughts, who feels that he isn't valued at all.
Yep.
He's told that
He's the problem.
he's the problem, that that's simply a facet of his own privilege and entitlement.
That's right.
I mean,
That's right.
it's quite
It's a comprehensive blaming the
extraordinary.
victim scheme.
Hmm.
The whole thing is blaming the victim. It's a scheme. As is feminism. This Aman Siddiqui's dissertation just nails this in 500 pages. I dare you guys to go read it. You will love it. It's amazing stuff. But he talks about the whole thing, even patriarchy. He shows how patriarchy is really blaming the victim. It's fascinating stuff. Just fascinating. We'll leave a link in below to his dissertation. We've had him on a couple times. Hopefully, Janice and I'll interview him the next time. But
Yeah,
it is
love to.
fantastic
Yeah.
stuff. But he literally tears this APA stuff apart just from the seams. It can't be put back together after you read
Hmm.
what he said. It's just amazing stuff.
And, and let's just look at their specific bullet points here. They mention that, this is the one page where they actually do provide a few concrete specifics of the evidence that men aren't always
What
doing so well in a
what are they
world that
blaming,
allegedly.
Janice? What are they
Of course,
blaming
they blame
here?
men for that.
They
Yeah,
blame
but
masculinity. Traditional masculinity is why it's
of
like
course.
this.
So
Okay.
let's look at their evidence. They say that life
Oh
expectancy for men
God.
around the world is 5 years less for men than women, at
Yeah.
least partially due to the lack of routine medical care. Now, does that have anything to do with the fact that far more money, at least in the Western world, is poured into
Women's
helping
health.
women
Yep.
and investigating women's particular illnesses than goes
Yes.
into investigating men's, but they don't mention that, of course. That's all an aspect of the patriarchy. And men's participation in more risky behaviors. So, again, that's men's fault, of
Ooh.
course. They never mention the fact that men die every year as a result of being in occupations with a very high fatality rate
Right.
and being in occupations that harm their bodies so that they do die earlier. And we all know what those types of occupations are: the logging, the commercial fishing, everything else that men do that is dangerous and dirty and that women aren't interested in doing. So what are they saying? That in the interests of equality, more women should take on those risky occupations? Are they
Yeah.
saying that we can simply do without those kinds of things? We're just going to stop all forms of resource extraction, the dangerous work maintaining the electrical grid, the dangerous work in the oil patch. Is it all going to stop? The lack of recognition of the many positives that men's willingness to take risks
Yes.
brings to our society that benefit all of us and that we should be thanking men for
Yes.
all the time is just enormous.
Yep.
So then they go on. Men are 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than women. Men are half as likely to seek mental health care than women. I mean, wow, that's rich. I
Wonder
wonder
why.
why. Because when they do seek mental health care, their own suffering is minimized, and they're told again that they're, entitled and privileged and need to put women and girls first. Wow.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
And 1 in 5 men feel lonely every day.
Huh. That means 4 and 5 don't. That's good.
That's true.
It's not
That's
bad.
good.
80%. That's pretty good.
That's true. And so
Sorry.
they end by saying that healthy manhood is the solution to this crisis of men's mental and physical health. When we break out of the man box, we embrace a full range of emotions, ask for and accept help, strengthen our networks of connection, support, and we live longer. Well,
If only we could
yeah,
love women more, all these good things will
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
Aye,
I
aye,
mean,
aye.
people, they must know that people will never be whole and healthy if they're told that primarily they don't deserve love as they are, and that they will only deserve respect if they devote themselves to another group in society, a group that is not men. That will never be a route to health, well-being, and general societal flourishing. And why these people could imagine even for a moment that this message could lead to wellness is just astounding.
Oops. There she
And do
is.
you have that final screen, Tom, the one about their vision statement, which I really
Oh,
thought
oh. How
said
can
it
I
all?
forget? How can I forget? Why isn't that coming up? Hang on, Janice. Let's go here. There it is. Thank
There
you.
it
I'd
is. I mean,
forgotten all
this,
about that one. And that's the worst of it right there.
yeah, helping create a world where all men and boys are loving and respectful, and all women, girls, and those at the margins of the margins are valued and safe.
I
Yeah.
mean, seriously, can you make that up? You can't make that up.
They're
You can't.
essentially saying that they do not value men and boys. Men and boys have no value in themselves. That's clearly there, because if we reverse the terms, we know, I mean, why not say, let's have a world where everyone is loving and respectful and everyone is valued and safe? But no, they can't do that. So do we want a world where women are loving and respectful of men and boys? Is that part of their vision too? Do they encourage women to be loving and respectful
And
of men
men
and
are
boys?
valued and safe.
Exactly.
Wouldn't that be
Do they
nice?
care about that? Do they care about men and boys being safe? Do they care about men and boys being valued? No, they don't, because if they did, they would have said they did. They
Yeah.
put a lot of effort into crafting this vision statement. I mean that is
Can you say?
this is a hate movement. You know,
Yes,
it really
yes,
is. It's
it really
telling men
is.
that they will never be valued for themselves. They are not valued for
Oh,
themselves. They
man.
are only valued to the extent that they value women in the feminist approved manner.
Yes. This is the Mobius strip of ideologies.
Hmm.
It's only
Yeah,
got one side. That's it. It's just bizarre.
yeah,
It's
it
been
is.
bizarre just talking about this today. I mean, it's like,
You know, it actually, when I was reading through it myself on my own, I felt tearful, even though I've seen all this stuff a million
huh.
times before, but seeing it in this slick
Yeah,
format,
yeah,
knowing, you know, knowing how incredibly successful this organization is, and it's only one of many. I mean, we've
yep,
come across
yep,
many
yep,
others, a white
yep,
ribbon campaign, you know, there's
yep.
all sorts. Thinking, as you said, of the millions of dollars that are poured
Oh, man.
into these things, of the many thousands of people making their livelihoods telling men that they are not valued. Wow, it is overwhelming, and it just, well, I mean, I guess as their final comment about it, maybe I just would say that it reminds us how thoroughgoing the anti-male pro-feminist project is
Yes,
in our culture.
yes,
and and I agree. The only thing I agree with them really is at the end, where they talk about men needing to form, you know, networks of support and reaching out to others if they feel lonely, or if they feel adrift, or depressed, or have had terrible experiences of suffering. They do need to reach out, but not to an organization like this.
no,
And
indeed not.
it's just a reminder that we need to keep on forming are parallel associations
Yes,
that work differently from this. And you know, would just really want to encourage any man listening to resist this, to know that all of this stuff is a lie and it's damaging, and to stay away from it entirely as much as possible. If it happens in your workplace and you have to attend a, you know, a workshop like this or a training session, get out of there as quickly as you can. Don't engage with these people at all, because
yes,
they are dangerous. There's no
yes,
point having a conversation with them, because
indeed.
they are thoroughgoing
Run
ideologues.
away. It's
And
crazy.
you know, and reach out to other men who recognize these lies, and who care about men, you know, who recognize men's value,
Yes.
and outside of this really divisive and pernicious feminist framework.
And actually, I have some good news to report. And that is that the Florida legislature has unanimously passed legislation for shared 50-50 shared parenting and pushing fathers back into the home.
Hmm. Good.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. They contacted Warren Farrell and asked him, about what they could do. And Warren contacted me, and he and I have been and some other people have been talking about ways they can help them move this legislation through. But DeSantis just have to sign it, and if he signs it, I think there's $80 million to do these two things, and that's a start. Getting fathers back in the
Yeah.
home is the number one priority. And
Hmm.
if
Yeah.
one state can start doing that and valuing their men and having billboards that say, "We love our Florida men,"
Hmm. Yeah.
what the hell?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
start saying, and we want fathers to be in the home because fathers are essential. So it's starting to happen. And who knows? DeSantis may try and veto it. Who knows? But I don't think so. Not with a unanimous vote like that. I think he'd have a hard time. So we'll see. So that's good news, eh?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
So
good news.
men are good. Get
Yeah.
involved in local politics and push this kind of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
Because
reach out to other men who reject this feminist nonsense, and recognize that it is to use that cliched word, it is utterly toxic.
yes, it is. It certainly is. And go to places like Studio B and menargood.com. And I think you'll find a much more welcoming spot. So, Janice, are we finished?
I think so. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Good
been
to talk
good.
about that stuff, Tom.
Really
Yeah, it's
enjoyed it.
really interesting. Yeah.
Enjoyed the time with you, and we'll see where we go. Men are good, as are you, Janice, and as
Thank
are
you.
you. We'll see you then. Bye bye.
Okay. Yeah. Talk again.
Men are good, as are you.